Hello friends, hope you're doing well. So coming off the last video, we will actually be starting up our series on Hinduism. Firstly with the Vedic deities, who are kind of like the OGs of it all. So this will be a part 1 since it's going to be a fairly long series. So with a quick disclaimer, I may botch a couple pronunciations along the way, since I'm not a current follower nor like an expert. So if someone is, feel free to put a comment down below, constructive criticism, and I'll be more than happy to look it over and correct myself in the future. So with that out of the way, let's start from the very top. Okay, so to begin, we must start with a quick introduction on the Vedas itself. So this is going to be a bit tricky, since now and then throughout the series, we are going to find some ties between Hinduism and Buddhism, because they do share a fair amount of values and kind of teachings along the way. Like, the Vedas is seen as like the earliest and most sacred kind of like Sanskrit series of scriptures in Hinduism, and others kind of see Buddhism as like a anti-Vedic philosophy, even though Buddhism throughout time has taken like much influence off the Vedas, dealing with like its deities and teachings. So with that, we are going to incorporate it and begin with a quick introduction to begin with our Vedic deity section. So the Vedas are separated into like 4 distinctions. They consist of the Rig Veda, which is seen as the oldest, followed by the Yajur Veda, then the Sama Veda, and lastly the Artha Veda. So each Veda, under kind of their construction, consists of like 2 parts, which is the Sahita, which is like a collection of like hymns and mantras, and then the Brahmana is like an illustration which holds like relation to the Sahita as kind of like its connection to the laws. So it is important to note that like the Brahmana holds their distinct Upanishads, which contain like key mystical doctrines, and both are usually meant for male use and like philosophical workings. So obviously as time went on, each Veda, their work has kind of like evolved into their own Sahitas, like the Vedas as a whole collective not really making its way down without like a good amount of dispute onto like what series of texts are most accurate to follow as a whole. And like as like mass oral teachings of each work began to like carry out, each of the 4 schools like would start to hold like fair amounts of discrepancies around like which to follow, with like the beliefs which is most correct. Several prime examples like could include the unequal numbers of like schools each different Veda possessed, alongside like drastic differences in tellings, with each believing they like possess like the true Vedas. So before we end, I just want to give like an example of such differences which could be explained between the Vedas. So I'll be using the school of like, let's say, the Yajur Veda, more specifically the white Yajur Veda and the black Yajur Veda. So they hold a myth based around the actions leading up to Yajnavalkya, wishing to obtain like the Yajis texts, like who would pray to the sun, to which his wish was finally granted, shining light upon the white while unknown to the black. In summary, the Vedas was like as a whole unknown until when they were particularly created, like the best estimation being sometime around like the 14th century BC, and undoubtedly some of the oldest written texts in history. But some are still conflicted on like when they're written. Some think it's earlier, when like others a long time later. So some before, some later, but in that time range. And overall, it is a very interesting series of texts. So now on to the introduction of the Vedic gods. Okay, just a note, this is going to focus mainly on the deities and gods, not so much on just miscellaneous mythological tales or religious aspects. if we like kind of brought up everything, this would be like a 5,000 hour video. So if something strikes you as interesting, which like relates to the gods, which, relates to the other two aspects, I'd be more than happy to make a video on it. But without further ado, let's begin with the main three like OG gods. So a good introduction could be taken by one of the oldest voices of Vedic work, Yaska, and describing the Vedic gods in a brief sense. So there are three deities according to the expounders of the Vedas: Agni, whose place is on the earth; Vayu, or Indra, whose place is in the air; and Surya, whose place is in the sky. These deities receive severally many appellations, in consequence for their greatness, or of the diversity of their functions. So these deities mentioned have been given the status of immorality, yet are not seen by all as self-existent beings. Differences in central accounts, dealing with the gods, most likely relates back to the different beliefs of the unique Vedas, as we mentioned at the very beginning. However, it has been mostly agreed upon that Agni and Savitri gained immortality directly from the gods, while Indra obtained hers through a boon of sacrifice. However, they are all the same in the power in the eyes of their creator. This, of course, is Prajapati, who is basically seen as kind of the lord of creatures in the Vedic period of India. Later on, in Hinduism, Buddhism, he became known as Brahma, who maybe most of you know him more so as. So basically, Prajapati taught the trio to be taught the correct form of sacrifice by their creator to kind of gain whichever boon is desired when necessary, most notably relating to immortality. The trio wished to become greater than the Asuras, more truthful and strong. These were the three original gods of Prajapati, all equal and all good. So now let's move on to Diaus and Prithvi. So they are seen widely as the two most ancient of the Aryan deities: Diaus, which is basically the heaven, and Prithvi, which is the earth. Their ancient upcoming sees them as being spoken mainly through hymns of the Rig Veda as the parents to the other gods, stated as great, wise, and energetic, who promote righteousness and the lavish gifts upon their worshippers. They're stated as grand creators, and they gain praise as those who made all creatures, and after they give immortality to their offspring. So they are pretty powerful. And keep in mind, they are below the three Vedic gods. So it has been stated that the Diaus were possibly created by Indra. As stated before, we mentioned them. So that again, Indra being kind of the air itself. So Indra basically created them, declaring her transcendence and greatness, viewing them as a chariot follows a horse. So keep that in mind. So basically, Diaus, which is the heaven, and Prithvi, all of earth, is just horses for Indra. So both have been portrayed to bow down to Indra, subject to his will and control, mainly answering to his commands. However, it has been stated also at times, being seen under controlled by Soma, leading to possible speculation onto kind of who they truly serve, and where their place rests among the others, kind of the other gods, But the most widely accepted are being created by Indra and serving him. So next we have Aditi and the Adityas. So basically, Aditi was viewed mainly through the Rig Veda as one of the only female figures addressed by name, and she serves primarily as the mother of the gods, as well as the bestower of blessings on children and cattle, alongside Varuna, amongst others. She serves mainly as the impersonation of infinity, especially boundlessness of heaven in opposition to the fight nightiness of Earth, while also seen to serve as like the personification of like, the universal all-embracing nature or being. So she's got quite the title on her hands. So what might be surprising or unsurprising, just depending on your knowledge of Hinduism, is that like the Adityas serve as the various descendants of Aditi, like throughout the flow of time. As notably like mentioned throughout the Rig Veda, the main six Adityas consist of like Mitra, Ariman, like Bhaga, Varuna, Daksha, and Amsa. In other rare versions, their numbers have been seen to like fluctuate to 7 or like even 8, while absent of names. So that could be a bit tricky. But of the well-known like 6 to be given names, mainly through like the Rig Veda, like with their hymns, all provide them context by Surya, as the Aditya identified with Agni is said to have been placed by the gods in the sky. Savitri and Indra also have in a passage addressed as a Aditya alongside with the Varuna and the moon, yet this was of course not permanent. So some of the gods have also kind of identified with the Aditya, which may be a bit confusing, but they are obviously far above this term. So now we're going to move along to like the 3 main OG Vedic gods. So we are going to start off with Agni. So basically Agni is like one of the most prominent and like well-respected deities within the Vedas. He basically just like takes the mantle as like the god of fire. A lot of people obviously know that. And alongside Indra, holds like the largest sum of hymns dedicated to him out of any other deity. And due to this like huge number, Agni's origins are like quite diverse in nature. His upbringings kind of consist usually of kind of being the son of like Prajapati, the son of like Diaus and Prithvi, or in like later periods the son of like the Dias, kind of like king of the Pitras, which is like the father of mankind, which are shown here. So he is kind of a mixed set of upbringings. So as mentioned before, Agni, unsurprisingly, kind of within the Vedas, holds a very large amount of context relating to like his appearance and like functionality with his prominence. So I will take some like context within the Vedas, which focuses like with key details, kind of detailing with like Agni. So within the Vedas, it basically just says that Agni is an immortal who has taken up his abode with like mortals as their guests. He is a domestic priest who rises before the dawn and who concentrates in his own person and excises in a higher sense all the various sacrificial offices which the Indian ritual assigns to a number of different human functionalities. He is a sage, the divinest amongst the sages, intimately acquainted with all the forms of worship, the wise director, the successful accomplisher, and the protector of ceremonies, who enables men to serve the gods in a correct and acceptable manner in cases where they cannot do this with their own unaided skill. He is also a swift messenger, moving between heaven and earth, commissioned both by gods and men to maintain their mutual communication, to announce to the immortals the hymns and to convey to them the obligations of their worshippers, or to bring the mortals down from the sky to the place of sacrifice. He accompanies the gods when they visit earth, and shares in their reverence and adoration which they receive. He makes the obligations fragrant. Without him, the gods experience no satisfaction. So besides this, Agni also serves as the general lord, protector, and king of men, being the lord in every house and guest in every home, omnipresent much, considered like the meditator between gods and men and the watcher of their actions. Yeah, goddamn, he's got a sum on his hands. So with such a position, which we could obviously just see, He has some of the highest divine functions, which are like ascribed to him, and holds like great authority over all the other gods. They like literally fear and pay homage to him, just as the mortals who worship him tremble. So like in equal measures, gods and mortals, they kind of like serve him. At times, like he's been stated as the son of heaven and earth, while others, he's said to like have stretched out both himself. This could probably be like due to obviously his like so many inclusions within the Vedas, but I would take the latter as kind of what to think. He is said to like created like all that like flies, walks, stands, or moves, while he crafted the endless seas of stars, including that of our sun, alongside the heavens itself, which is boundless. The guardian of immortality itself, he commands all riches on earth, on heaven, and while a forgiver of sins, an icon for the other gods. So he is whack. And definitely the top dogs. Definitely top three, besides only, you could argue, lower than, obviously, his father, Prajapati. So the second OG, which you could mainly say would be like the main light or sun deity, would be that of Surya. Heard many Vedic hymns, the sun is usually like granted the name of either like Surya or Savitri, sometimes used like exclusively, while others common are to use like interchangeably. All the while like holding distinctions of addressing like very specific objects, so it can be like kind of all over the place. But like when trying to explain the differences between the two, Surya is usually used like when the sun is like most visible to its people, while Savitri is usually when it's more so in the shadows. So that's key to note. Although it's like not carrying the number of hymns to match Agni, which is kind of hard to do, Surya has like held very well from like ancient times to present day, and is the main figure behind the dressings of like many sacred texts that the Gayatri carry out with like a lot of like Brahmins. Surya holds like a great deal of like respect and authority over the Vedas in general, due to its relation of the Gayatri being seen as a superior invocation within the Vedas, and the mother to the Vedas, and Brahmins as collectives, just like repeating it to a man is said to save oneself. Involving Vishnu, Brahma, Siva, within endless pages of the Vedas, it is no surprise that the worship of Surya has flourished. So, much like Agni, although he doesn't carry as many hymns as Agni does, his like prominence and importance still like makes his upbringing one like of like mixed beliefs, but it still has like a concise series of selections. Like many regard Surya as like the son of a deity, while others the son of kind of like Dianis and the husband of Usas, which is the dawn. While in other passages it has been said he had been produced by the first dawn itself, and the list can continue, set by like Indra, Soma, Agni, or other beginnings. Like various hymns dealing with like Savitri, it seems like most realistic for him to be like the sun's like shining strength and weakness, while like Surya is like the rise and the fall. Riding like a golden chariot, he is most notable. Like white steeds, by his presence, illuminate all that passes by, having blessings and fuse energies from the heavens to all living creatures he passes by. He is prayed to for like the deliverance of like sins, while conducting every departed soul to the abode of the righteousness. He's like a traveler, kind of, with a sick chariot. It's what Santa Claus wished he could be. Oh yeah. Carrying on like the theme of light, we have to mention also Pushan, who through like various hymns is the name of a sun god whose character does not really serve for like introducing as clear a deity as others, which are like more elaborated. But for what we do have, like Pushan is said to like bear the whole universe, like aids every traveler amongst their trips, and serves as like the wide protector of cattle, kind of like a deity. His powers like exceed those, like through like many's vague nature. He's been stated as the preserver and the nourisher, as Vishnu on several counts, and is invoked for many such occasions, which could include to protect like servants into war, who are like just kind of employed, while equally caring for them, while old, or called to bless a bride's hands, during new marriages. Even though his main last service is usually agreed to be conducting spirits of the departed from each world to the next, but no matter like what Pushan does, he will always be there for both his cattle and travelers. Like he protects them from any harm and leads them from journey to journey safely, wherever they go. He is honestly a pretty dope, cool dude. He has some cool stories if you guys are interested later on. Okay, so just warning you guys, getting into like the sun section, and darkness, we have to cover a fair amount of gods, since there is quite the number. So next we have Mitra and Varuna. This will be the last two we cover in this video before the part 2, where we will continue with some more sun gods, before we get into Indra. So these two deities are often like mentioned mainly in various hymns, with Varuna included more often than like the more reserved Mitra. It is more like Mitra having the mantle to rule over the day, while Varuna like takes care of all that like takes night. It's stated as the description dealing with Varuna as Varuna is sometimes seen visible to the gaze of his worshippers. He dwells in a house having 1,000 doors, so that he is ever accessible to men. He is said to have good eyesight, for he knows what goes on in the hearts of men. He is the king of gods and men, is mighty and terrible. None can resist his authority. He is the sovereign ruler of the universe. He's a pretty powerful guy. So Varuna is also responsible for making the sun function in heaven properly, with his like casual breaths, which also fuel the winds of heaven and earth. He also hollows the channels between river to river and watches each ocean from above. He's kind of like Poseidon. His ordinances are fixed. 3 operations of the moon, like walking in like brightness, like sit and appear at night, then vanish in the morning, are all under his control. He knows this motion, and like all things, whether it be like the birds in the air or the ships in the seas, like witnessing truth and falsehood in equal measure while this happens, is all part of his plan. This is unquestionable like omniscience. So more so involving Mitra, these are also through hymns. Usually are complemented with like the functions of the night, as they're most often paired with Varuna, the two spoken as like righteous and as like prime promoters of religious workings, side by side, while avenging all falsehoods and sins committed. Although tackling such sins like seen as like an all-holy being within the Vedas, teachings of the Puranas see heaven as a place of pure sensual delight, sitting on like a throne of like pure diamonds with his wife Varuni by his side. His court is formed by beings such as Samaruddha, Gana, and every other being and goddess, which holds sway over the rivers and oceans, rather than himself. So imagine just like a Poseidon just sitting on like a throne of gems, just like chilling, having like control over endless other gods, and just by like, I don't know, an insane goddess by his side, bride. Yeah, that's a Poseidon right there. Just whoop Poseidon's ass. So yeah, that is all for now in terms of the sun deities. We will continue in the next video with the last OG and then move on. There is definitely quite a bit to cover, but it's definitely interesting. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. Give me any feedback. And yeah, until then, next video. Peace.